Alright, before we begin this video essay, I wanted to clarify that this is not to be confused with the 1993 Genesis game of the same name. This video goes over the Ocean Software game of the live-action movie from 1995. So if you're looking for a video about the 1993 Genesis game, don't watch this one. Otherwise, let's get into it. The 1994 live-action Flintstones movie was considered a cult classic to many. Directed by Brian Levant and distributed by Universal Pictures, with John Goodman himself playing Fred Flintstone, many people still remember this live-action movie as being a cult classic. And sadly, while it was a massive box office success for them, the reviews were mixed to negative at best. Still, this movie holds a place in many people's hearts, and honestly, more power to them. Despite not doing well review-wise, 3 video games were made based off the movie. And yes, I said 3 games, I did not mess up. Most people will probably remember the Game Boy and SNES versions of this game, both of which can be easily found online. That's not what we're talking about. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, in January of 1996, they released a 3rd port of the game, and it was for the Sega Genesis. And if you've never heard of this version of the game, well,
there's a reason for that.
You see, the developers of this port, a now defunct studio named Fully High Tech, had made the grave mistake of releasing it exclusively on Sega's paid Sega Channel service, which in terms of video games preservation was a way of saying that you're getting sentenced to death. The Sega Channel launched in December 1994 for the Sega Genesis exclusively in North America for a while, but did eventually spread to other countries towards the end of its life. It was basically a service similar to Nintendo's Satellaview, where you would get the actual device itself for $25 for a one-time activation fee, and then would have to pay $14.95 a month. The monthly fee gave you access to a 50 to 70 game rotating library that would change games on the first of every month, and you could basically download these games without needing the physical cartridge. However, this did create several issues. Keep in mind, as a reminder, back in 1995, it was $15 a month, especially considering it launched 6 months before the Sega Saturn launched in North America. The service didn't get too far off the ground and was officially sunsetted in the summer of 1998. The Sega Channel also automatically deleted games upon turning the console off. This essentially made video game preservation on the Sega Channel nearly impossible, let alone back then. And this leads me into the reason why this game became lost media. The game was never released on a physical cartridge. It was exclusive to the Sega Channel for its entire life, and as a result remained lost media for 28 years, until just a few months ago when it was recently found, along with other Sega Channel ROMs that were also unbelievably able to be salvaged. So today we're going to be going over the history of Flintstones on the Genesis, how it became lost, and how it became found. So with that said, let's begin. This is the story of how the Sega Genesis Flintstones game was eventually found. The Flintstones on Sega Channel was officially released on January 1st, 1996. It's a platformer where you play as Fred Flintstone, who must rescue his friends and family from the villainous Cliff Vandercave, I don't know. It has a total of 5 zones, and it can be played in 1-player or an alternating 2-player mode, so sadly no native 2-player here. And you were able to play this on the Sega Channel at these specific times, which I'll be showing on screen. You could play from January 1st to May 1st, 1996, and then from June 6th to July 4th, 1997. This would be the last day you could officially play Flintstones on the Sega Channel, because less than a year later, it would end up shutting down. And after the shutdown, consumers who bought the Sega Channel were basically told to send their Sega Channels back into their cable providers. And whilst many people did listen, which ultimately worsened the chances of anything ever coming out of it again, some people thankfully refused to listen and now have a piece of historic Sega history. For 21 years. 21 years of fruitless searches, 21 years of not knowing if anything from Flintstones would ever be found. That was until December 31st, 2019. Mere hours before the new year, Hidden Palace user and founder DRX had dumped a prototype of the game online. Prior to this point, all we had were several screenshots of what the game looked like in a magazine from April of 1995 before the game's release. But after 21 years and 5 months, we actually had video footage of this game for the first time on the internet. The UI looks slightly different from the final release. There's a life counter at the top instead of at the bottom. The color of the score and life counters are blue instead of beige like in the final game. And for some reason, no in-game timer in sight at this point in development. My guess is that although the build date is currently unknown, we can safely assume that this was very early on in the game's development. It was sourced from an EPROM cartridge of all things when those were still relevant, and at this point in terms of preserving this game, we were finally heading in the right direction. Sadly, however, unlike the 7 levels that appeared in the final version, only the first 2 were playable on this cartridge. And the second issue is, well, let me see if you can hear it. Did you hear anything? No? Well, okay, because I didn't either, and that's because this game has 0 audio whatsoever. Until very recently, no version with the sound has ever been dumped online, and for the next 6 years, this was all we had, but at the very least, we were finally heading in the right direction. From 2020 to 2025, we still got nothing out of this, besides the prototype and several images of the game. Luckily, 2025 would be the last year we would have to wait before something else surfaced, and it was huge. And on December 15th, a huge day in preservation history would end up happening. On December 15th, 2025, the Video Game History Foundation, a San Francisco-based video game preservation company, had announced in a video uploaded onto their official channel that they had found a large portion of Sega Channel content, including the aforementioned Flintstones game in its full form. What's even crazier is that a few days after this video dropped, they were able to get into contact from David Foley himself, the founder of Foley High Tech. According to Foley, him and his company were contacted by Ocean, who were originally going to develop this game, after a man named Paul Robinson had left Ocean to work on other ventures. And it wasn't originally supposed to be released exclusively on the Sega Channel at all. It was originally going to be released on a cartridge, but due to intense straining on timeline and budget constraints from Ocean, Foley High Tech was unable to finish it and was swiftly cancelled, implying that this version of the game was originally going to be longer. They then decided to shift development over to the now defunct Sega Channel, and the rest of the story was history from there. Foley himself described it as a reduced or cut down version of the original draft. But regardless, after 28 years, the game had finally been found, and the game's ROM spread online shortly after. And I'm not kidding when I say this, but this right here is how the game ends. Clear warning that you'll be left pretty disappointed. Yup, that's literally the last part of the game. Cliff accidentally pulls a lever, gets stuff dumped on him, and then Fred's shocked for like 1 second and then says yabba dabba doo, and then the game ends. Honestly, I'm not mad, just incredibly disappointed. You're telling me we waited almost 30 years just for this to be the ending? We literally waited 30 years for the ending and the game itself to be subpar shit. Nah, in all seriousness though, it is incredible that this stuff has been found, although I was left pretty disappointed. The game itself was the furthest thing from special, and the ending was anticlimactic beyond belief. I get the game had severe budget and time constraints, but did it really have to end that soon? They could have at the very least made us battle him even if the battle wasn't that long. But no, Cliff just dies to his own mistaken hands, and Fred just gets the easiest victory royale of his life. Overall, the wait time for this game to be found wasn't worth it, and I'd recommend just playing the SNES or Game Boy versions or the actual Genesis Flintstones game. Hey everyone, thank you all for watching the video. I'm sorry I couldn't push this out last Saturday. My voice was completely dysfunctional at the time I was going to upload this. And since this is coming out today, I won't release another essay until next weekend, next Saturday on the 4th of July. I'm probably going to be doing a video essay on something 4th of July or Independence Day themed. It'll probably be on 4th of July themed video games or just games in general. And with that said, I will see you on the 4th of July with that video. Peace.